Greetings, my name is Kevin Matthews and I am the Tax Professor. Thank you very much for watching this video. Remember, class is still in session because the learning never stops. And today we're going to talk about a topic that probably I spend more time talking to people about than actually than anything else. And it's reasonable compensation. Most of my clients that I have that work with me, they are they're corporations. And so what ends up happening is that we always want to talk about reasonable compensation as a tax topic. And it's not something, look, you're not going to be able to go to some publication and say, what's reasonable compensation? The IRS is going to say, oh, you work in this is what your reasonable compensation is. It's not how it works anymore. And so there's actually, there's a long story to this, and I wish I could tell it. Unfortunately, it's one of us CPAs who actually caused a lot of this problem, and I don't want to get into it. But this guy was an arrogant, whatever. I can't even use language to describe how I feel about this individual, because he made a lot of people's lives horrible as a result of it. But essentially, the IRS came out and they won a court case where this individual wasn't paying himself reasonable compensation. And so the courts, the tax court actually set down sort of guidelines that they said that you have to follow in order to be able to say that you are being paid reasonable compensation. And so, the big question that a lot of my clients ask, well, what's reasonable compensation? I don't know. Depends on facts and circumstances. Okay, and then you have to be able, again, you got to be able to go in front of a judge and you got to be able to say, I think this is reasonable compensation, here's the reason why. And there's, and here's the thing. This is one of my favorite topics, mostly because we talk about it a lot, but this is an area that I really want to spend a lot of time in as a professional. And the reason is that, as I've said in other videos, I'm also, not only am I a CPA, but I'm also SHRM qualified. That's actually this certificate right here. It's my SHRM certificate, SHRM CP, which basically means that I am qualified in human resources. And so I actually teach at one of the universities around here compensation. In fact, I'll be teaching this spring compensation. And so one of the things that we always want to talk about, compensation is a great area to get involved in because there's two aspects to it. There's motivation, and then there's also the tax aspects to it. So I feel very qualified to talk about both sides of that, whereas most people who do compensation consulting, they know a little bit about the tax, but they don't know a whole lot about the tax. Or they're the tax experts, but they have absolutely no idea about motivation of people. So it's one of those things that we kind of that I think there's a need for it, and so I'm actually very glad to be putting this video out in order to talk about it. Now, setting aside motivating factors and all that other stuff, let's talk about what you need to do in order to avoid IRS issues. So they say that a corporation can actually create certain tax advantages. So the S-Corporation, for example, as compared to a partnership, which is another organization structure that's very similar to the S-Corporation. There's a lot of differences, but they're both pass-throughs. So the partnership actually has a self-employment aspect of it where you have to pick up self-employment income. Self-employment income is subject to the self-employment tax, which is 15.3%, which includes 12.4%, which is going to be for Social Security, and then the 2.9%, which is for Medicare. And so you have to pay those taxes if you're a partnership. Now, as an S-Corporation, the income that comes off of an S-Corporation is not self-employment income, and as a result of which there is a big motivation for people to move income from employment income to business income, because if it's business income, they get to they don't have to pay self-employment tax on it. But if you have to pick up some of that income as your W-2 wages, you will be picking up that self-employment income, even though it's more in the form of employment taxes, which is going to be your Social Security and your Medicare that you have, where the employee would be responsible for one half, the business is responsible for one half, and that's still the case with the S-Corporation, but because you may be the only owner of the S-Corporation, you're technically paying both sides. Okay. And so what ends up happening is there's a big motivation for people to say, I want to pay myself very little as compensation, but at the same time, I want to take a whole lot of dividends out in order to be able to, to take care of myself. And the IRS doesn't like that because they want the self-employment tax. And there's a public reason why they want the self-employment tax. They want you building up your Social Security income so that you can, you want to pay taxes into it because they use that tax money to pay out current benefits. But more importantly, they also want you to build up your ability to receive your Social Security so that when you retire, you're less of a burden on your family and other people. So there's a whole lot of reasons why to do this. As of this year, there's actually another reason, and that's because we have what's called the QBID, which is the Qualified Business Income Deduction. And the only thing that's going to be allowed to be used in the QBID is going to be business income. It's not going to be the compensation. So there's further reasons why people want to shrink their compensation, make it as small as possible, and in a sense, increase the amount of taxation that they're going to avoid. And that's not what the IRS wants. The IRS wants it to be based on fairness and reasonableness. So, and here's the thing. This doesn't apply just to S corporations, it's also C corporations. One of the big things that they used to have in the past was that when C corporations had a very high tax rate, 35%, and the individual rates were actually at around 35% or less, there would be a huge incentive for people to pay themselves excessive compensation in order to get it moved from the corporation to the individual. And as a result of which, sometimes the IRS goes, wait a minute, it seems like you're not really providing a whole, and it's not so much the person who's actually doing all the work and actually running the company. You might find out that, for example, the person's mom is making $200,000 for attending board meetings. And you're just kind of like, doesn't seem like reasonable compensation. And the reason why you're doing it is that you're trying to get it out as a tax deduction at 35%, pay it to your mom, who maybe at $200,000 is only paying, as an elderly person, probably only paying, 28, maybe 33%. So, there's still a tax savings as a result of that. So if it's not reasonable, the IRS isn't satisfied with it. So the reasonable compensation is going to be based on certain factors. And, the first one, the most important one, is the employee duties, the amount of time required to perform those duties, the employee's ability and accomplishments, the complexities of the business, the gross and net income of the business, the employee's compensation history, and the corporation's policy for all of its employees. And again, if you set this up correctly, you can save yourself a lot of headache within the court system. So, for example, what if I only pay my managers $80,000 a year? Okay, here in the Washington D.C. metro area, that's very, very low. That's like national average, but in Washington D.C., the actual average for an accounting manager is about $120. But if I want to pay them $80,000, maybe I pay all of their health insurance. So I give them top-level, Cadillac-level health insurance, fully funded by the company, so I pay them a little less money. Maybe I give them, as a form of compensation, significant fringe benefits that they don't have to pay for that are a tax deduction for me, but don't have to be picked up in income, because there's certain fringe benefits that you can actually take tax deduction free. Maybe I've agreed to give them the juicy parking spots, and I reserve a parking spot for them. Doesn't cost me anything, so I don't have to include it in their income. But, the person's like, hey, wait a minute, at my last job, I had to park way off in La La Land, walk, 2 blocks in order to be able to get to my business. This guy gives me a front space parking lot that's got my sign on it. It's got a sign on it that says, welcome to work. You're the greatest employee that I have. There's a whole lot of forms of compensation that we could be paying employees that are not going to show up in the W-2. Okay, and so some people, sometimes also on-site daycare. Now, some of that you will have to include in their W-2, and it will be taxed to them as compensation, but you're going to have to make that determination as to which one it is based upon the factors in the law. But again, we can design the compensation for your firm but at the same time also design that compensation for you. So if you're paying your managers $80,000 a year and you pay yourself, say, $90,000 a year, that's not going to be seen as too unreasonable. Okay, even though other people in the industry that do the same job that you do maybe make $200,000 a year. Okay, you see what I'm saying? So there has to be a certain reasonableness that's taking place dependent upon what your job duties are. Especially if, say, if you're coming into work and you're only working 40 hours a week, and your managers are coming in working 70 hours a week. And so you're paying you pay your managers $120,000 a year. You want to only pay yourself $80,000 a year. I'm only coming in 40 hours a week. I only come in, shake hands, kiss babies, and go home. I don't need to pay myself a whole lot of money. Okay, then the IRS, is going to have less and less of a case. So again, it's all going to depend upon how your compensation structure is set up, in my personal opinion. But it's also based on what do you do? How much time do you spend doing those? The complexities of the business. Running an accounting firm, for example, is a lot harder than, say, for example, running, a burger joint. Not to put down people who work at fast food restaurants, but a lot of those things are set up, pretty much in a process-based system. So there's not a whole lot of stuff that the individual has to have specialized knowledge in order to do. In fact, you want to be a manager at McDonald's, you can take courses at Big Mac University. I can't remember what they call it now, or what they used to call it, but it's, the university. But you don't have to. You can still become a manager without that specialized training. So there's a little bit of difference there. You see what I'm saying? Okay, so there's a number of concrete steps that you can take to make it more likely that your compensation will be considered reasonable and therefore deductible. A couple ideas that they have is that use minutes of the corporate board of directors to document the reasons for the amount of compensation paid. Remember, board minutes are legal documents. Whether you're public or private, doesn't matter. They can come in and they can say, hey, look, we're suing you for whatever reason, and as a part of the discovery process, we want to see what your board minutes were. That's a legal thing that they can do, and so you want to make sure that that's being documented and some of the reasons for that. Avoid paying compensation in direct proportion to the stock owned. Yeah, so for example, a very good example of this is, I own 80% of the compensation, and my three other people, we'll make it even. I own 70% of the compensation, and three other of my employees own 10% apiece. And so my compensation is, 7 times more than what theirs is. The IRS is going to be like, that's not, that's a little off. You're probably underpaying these people over here. On an S-Corporation, they're worried about the underpaying of people, whereas with the C-Corporation, it's the opposite. They're more worried about the overpaying of individuals. You want to keep your compensation in line with similar businesses with what their executives pay. If the business is profitable, make sure to pay at least some dividends. This avoids giving the impression that the corporation try to pay out all of us. And again, this research that I did was more focused on the C corporation problem. Something that you want to do on the S corporation side, I would actually say, if at all possible, avoid doing dividends when possible. Now, if you're going to do dividends, because say for example, a very good example, if you do dividends because you want to dividend some money out because you're going to be paying taxes, that's a perfectly legitimate reason. The IRS is not going to get mad at you for doing something like that. But say for example, if you're saying, okay, well, I'm going to pay myself $4,000 a month, which would be $48,000 a year, and then I'm going to take dividends every year of $100,000. Now the IRS is going to start coming back to me and saying, well, Kevin, we don't think that you're really paying yourself compensation that's fair and equitable because you're obviously living beyond your means. They're going to start looking at that and saying, well, $48,000 isn't what other people that do what you do. And you see how it kind of snowballs into something. You really want to sit down with a compensation expert in order to do this. Again, here at Beta Solutions, I'm more than happy to take that responsibility on, and I will put my qualifications up against anybody. I've only known 2 people in my entire life who had experience in both HR and in the accounting world, and usually it went the opposite way. They became accountants, did it for about 4 or 5 years, realized they hated it, went to HR, and they've been happy ever since. I have never met anybody else who was an HR person who said, I don't like HR, I'm going to accounting. And that's not why I did it. I actually did it. It was actually a very hard decision for me in the initial run, because as an HR person, I was very happy doing what I did. But as a CPA, I've actually been just as happy, if not in many cases much happier, doing what I do. But I love that I get to merge these two fields together in order to be able to be helpful with that. So this video actually went a heck of a lot longer than it was supposed to. But again, this is a topic I'm very passionate about. I really enjoy talking about it. If you want to reach out to me, feel free to leave a comment in the box below, or you can go to my website at www.betasolutioncpa.com. That's www.betasolutioncpa.com. Remember, my name is Kevin Matthews, and I am the tax professor. Class is still in session because the learning never stops. Again, if you want to reach out to me, comment section below or on my website. And thank you very much for watching the video.